He's one of the biggest celebrities, full stop, in early national Philadelphia. A hero.
A murderer. Extremely well respected.
Against the established order of the day.
Narrow-minded.
He's pretty convinced that he's a secular religious figure, for want of a better term, a god.
Benjamin Rush was born in 1745 in the northeast corner of Philadelphia County. His father died. Rush was just 5. He was sent to Maryland to live with his uncle, an evangelical preacher. Reverend Samuel Finley inculcated Rush with a revivalist spirit and urged him to become a doctor. He studied medicine at Princeton, interned at Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia, and set out for advanced study at Edinburgh, Scotland in 1765.
He was one of the many physicians from Philadelphia that went to Edinburgh for an education, which made him an elite physician. At the time, it was the best medical school in the world.
There, Rush also gained exposure to new political currents then swirling about the city. On his return to Philadelphia in 1769, he became involved in the movement for independence, writing pamphlets on liberty and the abolition of slavery.
People like Benjamin Rush are becoming part of what in the 18th century is called a republic of letters. It's the closest thing that the 18th century would get to what we would call a meritocracy.
In 1775, he urged his friend Thomas Paine to publish a pamphlet calling the American colonists to revolution. Paine wanted to call his manifesto Plain Truth, but Rush suggested a different name, Common Sense.
I like to think of Benjamin Rush as one of the great American polymaths. He has interests and ambitions as a statesman. He's a great medical authority. He's a reformer. He's someone who seems to have his hands in every possible part of American social and political life.
In January of 1776, Rush married Julia Stockton, the daughter of his friend Richard Stockton of Princeton. 6 months later, he signed the Declaration of Independence.
During the Revolution, he became head of the medical department of the Middle States, and there's a lot of jockeying for position.
Rush was angered by the poor condition of Army field hospitals and began a letter-writing campaign to his superiors, assailing General George Washington and Chief Army Surgeon William Shippen as unfit leaders. Frustrated by opposition to his ideas, Rush resigned in disgust and returned to Philadelphia, taking a position at Pennsylvania Hospital and becoming active in the abolitionist community.
He's a member of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. But Benjamin Rush is also interested in his standing as a racial reformer.
Think about Rush's standing. You're already a part of the American elite. There were a number of people now in that time who professed the same things that Rush did, that all human beings were created equal, but really didn't want to live that out and didn't want those close relationships.
Despite his expressed abolitionism, Rush purchased a man named William Grubber in 1776 and enslaved him for 10 years. He wrote that he believed dark skin to be a form of contagious leprosy. Yet, he remained a staunch financial supporter of the free black community of Philadelphia.
It was a complicated relationship. Rush was a great benefactor. And I think Rush kind of saw the handwriting on the wall as well, that rather than America moving forward toward a place where we could really all be one, that quickly it was unraveling and we were going into separate corners.
In 1793, yellow fever devastated Philadelphia, killing thousands. While many fled the city, Rush stayed behind, treating more than 100 patients a day, using a controversial treatment regimen of bloodletting, mercury laxatives, and induced perspiration. In the midst of the epidemic, Rush amplified his efforts by imploring his allies in the free black community to mobilize hundreds of African Americans as nurses to carry out his so-called heroic treatments.
His ideas were all connected. His medical treatment, his political views, his social views, you could call it almost a Republican treatment. Anybody could do this if they were properly trained.
Rush's treatments caused fierce divisions within the medical community, prompting him to resign his founding membership in the College of Physicians, rather than alter his method of bleeding and purging.
What I think about Benjamin Rush is someone who is profoundly wrong, but in a way that allows other people to be right.
After the fever passed, Rush committed himself to the study of psychiatry. As the chief of the mental ward at Pennsylvania Hospital, he infused his medical practice with Calvinist teachings, emphasizing occupational therapy to cure mental disorders. In 1812, he published the first American textbook on mental illness.
How would you summarize the values of people like Benjamin Rush? No matter how inconsistently or imperfectly they actually in their own lives lived these values, what they're fundamentally saying is that no one person is born to a position of authority over another person.
We do have to see him as the man of his time. His dedication to the betterment of Philadelphia and America. He was very drawn to that idea that America was a destined country.
Rush continued to treat patients regularly until he was finally bedridden by respiratory problems in April of 1813. He accepted treatments of bloodletting for several days before he died at the age of 67. Dr. Benjamin Rush and his wife Julia are interred at the Christ Church Burial Ground in Philadelphia.
In our Unitarian Universalist history, there are two 18th century Pennsylvanian Universalist physicians, Dr. George de Benneville and Dr. Benjamin Rush. Today, I would like us to consider Dr. Rush. In his biography of Rush on the Dictionary of Unitarian and Universalist Biography, Charles Howe writes, "In his time, Rush had no peer as a social reformer. Among the many causes he championed, most of them several generations in advance of nearly all other reformers, were prison and judicial reform, abolition of slavery and the death penalty, education of women, conservation of natural resources, proper diet, abstinence from the use of tobacco and strong drink, and the appointment of a Secretary of Peace to the federal cabinet." But as you saw from our video, Rush was not perfect. The video, I believe, notes that some might call him a savior and others might call him a murderer. Howe explains in his biography, after earning an AB in 1760 from the College of New Jersey, Rush studied medicine from 61 to 66 under Dr. John Redmond in Philadelphia. It was on Redmond's advice that he continued his studies at the University of Edinburgh, where he received his MD degree in 68. He did further training at St. Thomas's Hospital in London till 69. And it was in Edinburgh that he embraced a new explanation of disease taught by the prominent instructor, Dr. William Cullen. Rejecting the old theory based upon the balancing of the four humors, Rush believed that the root cause of disease was, quote, irregular, convulsive, or wrong action, unquote, especially of the blood vessels. The therapy he recommended to restore the circulatory system to normal was bloodletting. During the Great Yellow Fever epidemic in Philadelphia in 1793, Rush worked tirelessly and heroically to care for patients and to curb the spread of the disease, at the same time keeping detailed records. And in face of widespread criticism, he persisted in promoting drastic purgation and radical bloodletting as means of treatment. The more bleeding, the more death, one critic complained, and not without cause. Rush would never be disabused of his belief in bloodletting's effectiveness. Indeed, he insisted on the treatment for himself during his final illness. This part of Rush's history might serve as a caution to all of us to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong. In the 2019 article in the American Psychiatric Association News, The Life of Benjamin Rush Reflects Troubled Age in U.S. Medical History, Aaron Levin writes that Rush returned from his studies in Edinburgh to become the colony's first professor of chemistry at the College of Philadelphia. Benjamin Franklin was the first president of the school's board of trustees. Less than 3 weeks later, he was called out on his first psychiatry case. A Captain John McPherson, who exhibited symptoms of what today would be called mania and paranoia. He also cared for McPherson's distraught wife, thus learning a lesson about the need to care for the families of patients. Rush argued for consideration of the whole person. He said, knowledge of the mind opens to the physician many new duties. It is calculated to teach him that in feeling the pulse, inspecting the eyes and tongue, examining the state of the excretions, he performs but half his duties in the sick room. Rush would eventually have an even more direct link to the treatment of mental illness when his own son, John, was committed to the hospital after killing a good friend in a duel. In an article entitled Benjamin Rush and His Insane Son by Eric T. Carlson, MD, and Jeffrey L. Wallach, MA, posted on the National Library of Medicine webpage, they write that Rush wrote to Thomas Jefferson in 1811, "My son is better. He has become attentive to his dress. Now and then opens a book, converses with a few people, but still discovers with a good deal of melancholy, alienation of mind upon several subjects, particularly those which associate with the cause of his derangement. He is now in a cell in the Pennsylvania hospital." And then Rush repeats what he had said the previous April, where there is too much reason to believe he will end his days. Benjamin Rush himself never knew the outcome of his son's case, for he died on the 19th of April, 1813. John Rush, as his father predicted, never left the hospital and died there after a residency of 27 years on August 9th, 1837. Carlson and Wallach begin their article noting how commonplace dueling was in the early days of our country, especially among the military, which John Rush was a part of. Gun violence took its toll even then. Howe, in his biography, writes, a pioneer in the study and treatment of mental illness, Rush insisted that the insane had a right to be treated with respect. He protested the inhuman accommodation and treatment of the insane at Pennsylvania Hospital. And when he received an inadequate response to his complaints from the hospital's board of managers, Rush took his case to the public at large. In 1792, he was successful in getting state funding for a ward for the insane. Unfortunately, part of Rush's treatment for people with mental illness was based on his ideas of the cause of physical illness. One of his prescriptions for a patient was bleeding, strong purges, low diet, kind treatment, okay there, and the cold bath. Anticipating Freudian analysis by a century, Rush also listened to his patients tell him their troubles and was interested in their dreams. He recommended occupational therapy for the institutionalized, and his medical inquiries and observations upon the diseases of the mind, published in 1812, was a standard reference for 70 years and earned him the title of the father of American psychiatry. To turn to issues of race, a piece on Rush on the Dickinson College website begins, "The college's founder, Benjamin Rush, was acutely interested in the issues of slavery, abolitionism, and racial difference. His deep-seated faith in the power of rationality to dispel injustice and undeserved privilege led him to reject notions that others used to support inequality. For Rush, human beings were naturally disposed towards freedom, and he regarded African Americans as capable of shouldering the responsibilities of freedom. I need say hardly anything in favor of the intellects of the Negroes or of their capacities for virtue and happiness," he wrote, "although they have been supposed by some to be inferior to those of the inhabitants of Europe. The accounts which travelers give of their ingenuity, humanity, and strong attachments to their parents, relations, friends, and country show us that they are equal to the Europeans." For Rush, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, all men were created equal, including those enslaved. For Rush, slavery was not simply unjust, it was a transgression against natural law and a blight against God. He believed that the new nation could not continue to maintain such a scourge without a reckoning. "Remember that national crimes require national punishments," he wrote about slavery. "And without declaring what punishments await this evil, you may venture to assure them that it cannot pass with impunity unless God shall cease to be just or merciful." Rush, therefore, was a committed and prominent abolitionist. In 1787, he joined the Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society, not only as a powerful advocate, but also as an author of its new constitution and as secretary and later president. He maintained close contacts with Philadelphia's African American community, including helping found the city's first Black church. But unfortunately, as is so often the case with Rush, the article doesn't end there. It continues, but this fairly straightforward narrative of Rush's view on African American slavery and abolition is complicated by other facts. Rush bought and enslaved a child, William Grubber, whom he owned until he freed him for compensation in 1794. Rush also mixed his views on race with his interests in physical science and his firm religious beliefs. Eager to prove that all human beings descended from one pair, Adam and Eve, he came to think that the disease of leprosy caused the blackness of skin color. A cure, therefore, would change African skin color back to white, thereby allowing Rush to support his Christian creationism, to counter those who argued that blacks were naturally disposed to enslavement and to support their future assimilation as full citizens. Rush was a flawed man, but one who seems to have mostly tried to do what he thought was right. And sometimes he actually was right. Hal writes in his biography, Rush made many contributions to medicine that have stood the test of time. He advocated the simplification of diagnosis and treatment of disease. Let us strip our profession of everything that looks like mystery and imposture, he wrote. He was an early advocate of preventive medicine. In particular, he pointed out that decayed teeth were a source of systemic disease. He promoted inoculation and vaccination against smallpox. I have said little of Rush's political involvements, and there's a reason. Again, from Howe's biography. Rush was a delegate to the Continental Congress convened in 1775 and a signer of the Declaration of Independence the following year. During the Revolutionary War, he served briefly as Surgeon General of the Armies of the Middle Department, as our video noted. Finding the Army hospitals corruptly and incompetently managed and frustrated that his office did not give him power to reform them, Rush wrote letters of complaint to Congress and to General George Washington, and resigned after Washington accused him of personal disloyalty. In 1787, Rush and James Wilson led the Pennsylvania Convention that ratified the federal Constitution. 2 years later, they led a successful campaign to develop a more liberal and effective state constitution. And that was Rush's last involvement in politics, for which he had developed an intense dislike. So what do we learn from this Universalist forebear? I would say, strive to do what you think is right, but be open to listening when someone says you're wrong. Hold your belief lightly, being always open to change. Don't become obsessed with an answer to the point that you cannot or will not change your view. Rush is our Universalist forebear. But before I end, I would like to pay tribute to another doctor this week. She was not a Unitarian Universalist. Indeed, she spent 5 unsuccessful months as a nun with the School Sisters of Notre Dame. But as Dr. Susan Love died last Sunday, I thought it fitting to recognize her as I speak so much about medicine. According to Wikipedia, she was an American surgeon, a prominent advocate of preventive breast cancer research, and author. She was regarded as one of the most respected women's health specialists in the United States. Love is best known for pioneering work fueled by her criticism of the medical establishment's paternalistic treatment of women. She was an early advocate of cancer surgery that conserves as much breast tissue as possible. She was among the first to sound the alarm on the risks of routine hormone replacement therapy for menopausal women. And Love fought to expand the rights of same-sex couples as parents. In 1993, Dr. Love and Dr. Helen Cooksey made history by getting approval for the first joint adoption by a gay couple from the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, a state that did not recognize same-sex marriage at the time. The couple married in San Francisco in 2004. In 1996, she retired from the active practice of surgery to dedicate her time to finding the cause for breast cancer. According to the New York Times, Love sought not so much to cure the disease as to vanquish it altogether by isolating its causes, and preempting them at a cellular level. She was not a Unitarian Universalist, but she shared our values. And isn't that what matters the most? Our closing hymn is number 148 in the gray hymnal, Let Freedom Span Both East and West. I invite you to stand as you're comfortable.
Let freedom span both east and west, and love both north and south, in universal fellowship throughout the whole wide earth. In beauty, wonder everywhere, let us communion find. Compassion be the golden cord, binding humankind. Beyond the barriers of race, of color, caste, or creed, let us make friendship, human worth, our common faith and creed. The earth and west will meet and share, and south shall melt with north. One human commonwealth live throughout the wide earth.
Please remain standing for our closing words and our chalice extinguishing. The closing words are from former First Lady, lawyer, and author Michelle Obama, who said, "You may not always have a comfortable life, and you will not always be able to solve all of the world's problems at once. But don't ever underestimate the importance you can have, because history has shown us that courage can be contagious and hope can take on a life of its own." Please join in our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And let us sing together, Weave. You may either just raise your hands, or if you're comfortable holding hands, you may also do that. Please remember to exit through the kitchen to the garden for our garden dedication.